The Defender was one of the most outrageous vehicles at Tier 8 when it was released as a premium vehicle within World of Tanks. But how does the release of the Udarniy, the 2022 version of a Defender, stack up against the old machine, and is it any better / is it more overpowered, and is this just the power creep version of the Defender? Well, today's video is going to aim to showcase some of the strengths and weaknesses of this, and of course, to start with, let's look at the statistics between the two vehicles because they are fairly similar and see how they stack up. So, without further ado, the damage per minute of the vehicle, well, of course, the Udarniy does have more damage per minute, and that is down to the fact that it has a more reliable gun with a better reload. So you're looking at 2000 DPM with the Udarniy over 1800 with the Defender, so it's a significant increase over its original counterpart, I suppose you could call it. Of course, the damage is 390 instead of the 440 which the Defender has, so there could be some arguments for saying, you know, they're fairly comparable because you may have to deal an extra shot of damage every single minute to be able to deal the extra couple of hundred damage, or however you might want to view it. Essentially, they're not that much of a difference, and I think the extra DPM would probably come into an advantage over the longer reload of the Defender, so I'd probably prefer the gun of the Udarniy with the increased accuracy, so you're looking at 0.4 dispersion instead of 0.42, and this is without any perks. This is the base version of the vehicle, and of course 2.97 second aim time instead of 3.07. You're looking at a rate of fire advantage and reload, so instead of the 14 seconds from the Defender, you're looking at 11.5. So it's a significant difference in the reload time, so that makes the Udarniy at least be able to cover its reload a little bit better and maybe put some obstacles in between you and the opponent whilst then kicking out more DPM. And of course, there is also the mobility issue that the Defender has over the Udarniy. Of course, the Udarniy goes 45 kilometers an hour, and that ties in to one of the most main components of this vehicle over the Defender, which is the armor model of the vehicle. Because when you look at the Udarniy in the live model, as we've got here, you can see that the armor model is outrageous. It's of course the V shape, which makes tracking and penning this vehicle very difficult. You have to look at the upper right area of the track if you want to pen and actual track the opponent, and even then you may or may not actually track him because it counts as space. So if you're firing heat, then it's not going to help whatsoever, and you're just going to end up tracking the vehicle, which isn't necessarily awful, but it's not amazing either. So you've got that. Of course, the rear of the tank you can actually track and pen, so this is where I would be aiming in my own personal opinion. This is the area, if you do have the broadside of the vehicle, where you should be aiming. As you see, if you start over angling kind of towards the back and they start looking in the opposite direction, you'll see that the armor model gets really, really good, and you're just going to bounce straight off of it. Now, there is one key weak point, and that is this, I guess, diamondy shape area in the hull armor, which is essentially just a flat box, if this makes sense. So you can see it here, this green area here, which can be penned by pretty much anyone that comes up against it. But remember, when it's traveling at 45 kilometers an hour, moving side to side, trying to hit this in this sort of area is going to be quite difficult. And remember, when a lot of tanks are actually maybe above it because of the height of the vehicle, this isn't the smallest vehicle, so imagine it more like a, I guess, I don't know, something like an IS-6, so it's that sort of size, and the thing is like, you're still going to be getting penned through this. It's just the case of like, when you're moving side to side, you're going to be able to avoid hitting this thing, and it obviously, with accuracy being as it is in the game, of course, rounds hitting the upper plate are just going to bounce, rounds hitting right of this are going to bounce, so rounds hitting left of it are going to bounce, and even then they may not even hit anything, and you'll just end up being basically tracked. So it's not really any negatives to hitting this thing. Now, Of course, it does get the bigger cupola over the Defender. You can see the Defender's cupolas are quite shallow, but I guess, like, you know, it's not that big of a problem. And when you're moving left and right, then you can kind of get away with it maybe. But the most thing is that you have that 10 kilometers an hour top speed difference between the udarniy and the 252U, which is, I think, what the udarniy really looks at over the kind of 252U, and why I think that this vehicle is probably the better of the two. They get the same amount of gun depression. Elevation is slightly worse on the udarniy, so it's not particularly amazing. More ammo, essentially just basically everything is better with the udarniy, except from maybe some of the small things like engine health. I mean, these are minor things that aren't really going to impact your game. Power to weight ratio is slightly worse, so getting up to the top speed might be a little bit difficult, but at the same time we'll look at some gameplay and showcase what this tank can actually do and the sort of setups maybe you want to be taking. But remember, you can always counteract this by using things like turbo or something like this if you really wanted to boost up that horsepower to kind of make it more reliably able to travel at 45 kilometers an hour. Of course, this vehicle also has more view range because of that bigger cupola, I suppose, is what Wargaming are trying to say it as. But at the end of the day, this is a basic power crept version of a Defender. I think you're going to be able to bounce more rounds in this thing, since the Defender basically just relies upon the fact that people maybe don't have 220 millimeters of penetration in that lower plate, and this one is just basically trying to talk about accuracy, and hopefully they just don't hit it. And of course, I think that this tank is probably the better of two. Let's look at the replay and see how it fares in the gameplay instead. So here we are in game in the udarniy, and we're going to see whether or not that armor model, as we've expected, holds up, and also the actual speed of the vehicle, whether it is truly as fast, if not faster than the Defender, like it says so within the statistics, because we all know that sometimes things like they show in the top speed limits do not always be the be all and end all of a vehicle, because often, like the IS-7, you may not be able to get up to the top speed. And you're seeing here on the soft terrain, or I guess the medium terrain maybe, we are a lot slower than that of 45 kilometers an hour. You're looking about 35 kilometers an hour consistently, which maybe is slightly better than the Defender might be doing, but it's not that much faster to the point where maybe you'll be blitzing past a lot of them. But regardless, the key thing about this tank is moving forward and using the gun statistics that this has and the advantages of that, the DPM advantage, to come out with some wins and see whether or not that this thing truly is as good as people are making out, or maybe as broken as people are making out. And that is ultimately what we try and do within these videos, is just showcase some of the best tanks, some of the best replays, and of course showcase some varying different degrees of gameplay that loads of different people do within the replay system that we have on World of Tanks, and just see how you can maybe adapt your own gameplay to suit some of the gameplay styles that you like and see within this that end up yielding some really amazing results within World of Tanks. But within this replay in particular, we're going to see some pretty aggressive gameplay style on steps coming up against some tier 9 and tier 8 vehicles. Of course, this is a tier 8 vehicle that, to all intents and purposes, has the armor of maybe a tier I don't know, like a tier 9, I would say, in terms of its armor model, and of course effective armor in terms of that as well. So you're seeing here coming up against the 50TP, the Charioteer, and there are a whole host of other vehicles within the game. If we open up the minimap, you can see that there is a ton more vehicles in the spawn location that are sitting back, the AMX 5100, and that's really where it's at. Now, you saw there a very nice shell into the 50TP. That wouldn't have been possible with the Defender, since you would have had that extra long reload comparatively with this vehicle, or compared to the Defender with this. And you can see here the Standard B also trying to run, but because of the reload you're able to shut them down, and this is what the udarniy offers over the Defender, because you may receive the extra alpha, but to me, I would much rather have a more consistent weapon that you can keep in the fight constantly and just pin people down, use the tracking mechanics that are in the game to just shut people down and stop them from getting away, and reload quick enough to be able to just lock people in place like the 50TP there. It's just not possible with the Defender. And I mean, should it be possible with the Defender? Probably not, but considering that this is basically maybe an upgraded version of that vehicle, then Yeah, it's certainly one of those that is not very fun for the opponents to use. And remember, a lot of people will be angling very hard in this vehicle because it has the V-shaped hull, which is super hard to pen. You can see the 50 TP here trying to pen the lower plate. Of course, not entirely sure if he was avoiding hitting that lower plate because you were angled down the slope, which means that the that triangle proportion at the front of it becomes super difficult to actually pen. So this is the sort of things that you have to be thinking of when you too also come up against the udarniy. And you'll find that even players that maybe don't understand the angling mechanics will find it a massive struggle to reliably go through the udarniy in general because of just the angling of the armor, the kind of weirdness that I guess you'll see with this vehicle over some of the others in the game. And kind of like, I don't know, it's just one of those that is going to be super annoying if you are trying to be super accurate, especially when you're considering that most vehicles you should be coming up against with this are supposedly heavy tanks, because since you'll be brawling and stuff like that, then the accuracy is even worse. So trying to reliably hit lower plates that are fairly small in comparison to the overall tank and compared to most lower plates within the game, then yeah, it's not particularly very fun for the opponents. You're seeing here also the use of the 6 degrees of gun depression means you can use spots like this. It is not completely kind of inflexible within the game, but you certainly have to be a little bit careful with how you're kind of moving forward and angling and stuff like that. You're seeing now just a real ruffle stomp through the game, and to be honest with you, it's one of those where I feel like the defender, yes, it may be super I guess in terms of its armor model if people don't have the penetration, but this tank is one of those that it doesn't really matter a whole lot even if they do have the penetration, because it's based on the accuracy of someone's tank compared to, I guess, the actual ability to hit the lower plates. Now, people can pen this tank, as you've seen there, that there have been a few rounds going into it. You're seeing here the cupola being penetrated, and also basically the cupolas being penned, which is a problem. And I mean, it happens, and of course if someone hits the side of your vehicle, they can also hit the side here. And these are all things that you'll kind of have to take away with you, and that comes with experience of playing the tank and just making sure that you've got the armor in the most effective way as possible when coming up against opponents. But 5,200 damage done in such a short period of time, it's just one of those where I feel like a lot of people maybe at the moment don't understand the armor model of the udarniy, and you can exploit that to your own advantages if you do own this vehicle. But also the fact that this tank is just a bit of a Goliath when it comes to just chunking away damage on the opponent's team, because you're seeing here that the reload seems a lot better than you would expect from most heavy tanks at tier 8, remember, because 2000 DPM, when you buff it up, you're probably looking at about 2,400 DPM roughly, which equates to probably a reload of about 9 seconds or somewhere in that region, which is, you know, enough time to be able to maybe retrack some heavy tanks on the enemy team if they don't maybe have the track mechanics and have souped up their equipment. And so it could be definitely a tank that people fear within the game, and rightly so. I think that this vehicle is definitely a very strong one. Do I think it's as outrageous as the Defender was when it was first released? I mean, the chatter, I guess, online has been a lot less, but I definitely think that this is a slightly better version of the Defender, maybe, in my opinion, albeit most people can, if they've got decent accuracy, hit that lower plate, which can be penned by everything. So at least it doesn't stop people from basically just YOLOing you, I guess, and still not being able to do anything. So yeah, I feel like this tank is definitely a strong one, and you can see here being able to just face hug the T54 Mod 1 here, not exposing that lower plate because you don't want to overexpose, you want to go right over, but using the accuracy here to finish him off. And then with just the standard B, and of course this Spatuk, who could be absolutely anywhere, so you've got to be a little bit careful with that. And he could be in front, which is most likely the likely story. We could probably look at where we're expecting him to pop up somewhere on this ridgeline maybe, or maybe he is just purely coming round from behind. So you just got to shut down the standard B if possible and remove him from the game. Of course, he is the one that was knowing where the weak points of the udarniy were, being that big cupola, or at least somewhat bigger cupola compared to the defender. And it's all of these tanks that Wargaming keep releasing, which have very, very minor weak points, and just tanks that are basically getting smaller and smaller weak points and getting better and better DPM as heavy tanks is just, yeah, it's kind of outrageous. And so tanks like this are not particularly very fun for opponents to come up against. And I hope we don't see too many more of these, because it is not good for the game's health. You can see here landing shells into the Spatuk and hopefully removing the rest of his hit points as the base ends up being captured. But 6,900 damage done within that replay, and of course picking up 2,225 and 50 block damage along with 1,305 assistance is certainly one of the better games that you can see within the udarniy. And I think in general maybe this tank is better than the defender. But of course, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about the fact that Wargaming have made the V-shaped hole, meaning that you can't even track and pen this vehicle reliably. And what do you think about this big T-shaped profile, I guess, in the central area of the hole, which can be penned by pretty much everything, unless of course you're above it, and makes it super hard to hit. And of course, with the armor model of the rest of the vehicle and that smallish cupola on top of the vehicle being the other weak point, yeah, be interesting to see your thoughts. And thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to check out some others, there will be some on screen right now that I really highly recommend you go and have a look at, and let me know in the comment section down below if you want me to check out anything else in particular. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.